Every Father's Day for 20 years, Daniel brought his father a sunflower. Not a bouquet, not a basket. One sunflower, minus tall yellow, slightly imperfect the way flowers from roadside stalls, always are minus wrapped in the same thin paper, the vendor twisted around the stem with practiced hands. His father never asked for it, never mentioned it the rest of the year. Just took it when Daniel held it out, turned it once in his hands, the way you turn something you want to see from every angle, and put it somewhere in the house where it could be seen from his chair. For 20 years, Daniel thought it was a small thing. He had no idea his father had been keeping every single one. The first sunflower had been purchased on a Sunday morning in June, 20 years ago, by a 7-year-old boy with 75 cents in his pocket. Daniel's parents had separated that winter. His mother had moved them into a smaller apartment 2 towns over, and Father's Day that year had arrived before anyone had figured out what Father's Day was supposed to look like in the new arrangement. He had walked to the corner stall alone, minus he remembered it being farther than it actually was. The way distances feel when you're 7 and determined. He had counted his coins twice on the way. He had enough for one flower. The man at the stall had let him pick, and he had chosen the tallest sunflower because it seemed like the most for the money. His father had opened the door and looked down at the flower, and then at his son, and something had moved across his face that Daniel didn't have a word for at 7 years old. He had one now, but it had taken him 20 years to learn it. The word was undone. If you believe that the smallest things we do for the people we love are sometimes the biggest things they carry, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your dad today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Because what Daniel found in his father's bedroom on this Father's Day is something he will spend the rest of his life being grateful he didn't find too late. The sunflower became a habit, the way important things do without announcement, without decision, simply by happening again the following year, and then the year after that. At 9, Daniel had bought it with lawn mowing money. At 12, with birthday cash, he'd been saving for something else. At 15, the year he and his father had the kind of argument that leaves a mark, he had almost not gone. He had stood outside his father's door for 4 minutes with the sunflower in his hand, working up to the knock. His father had opened the door before he could decide. He had looked at the flower, then at Daniel. Then he had simply stepped aside to let him in, the way a man does when he has been waiting and doesn't want to make a fuss about how long. At 19, Daniel had driven 6 hours on a near-empty tank because he'd forgotten until the morning of. At 22, he had brought it to his father's hospital room. After the surgery, minus the stems too tall for the small vase a nurse found, leaning against the wall instead, yellow and slightly wilted but present. At 25, newly married, he had brought his wife. His father had shaken her hand and then quietly told her, "He's been bringing me sunflowers since he was 7. I don't know if he knows how much I look forward to it." Daniel had been in the kitchen getting glasses. He hadn't heard it. He would hear about it later from his wife, and he would not know what to say, so he would say nothing, and the moment would pass the way moments do when you don't yet understand their weight. The diagnosis came 3 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, delivered in the kind of clinical language that doesn't soften things so much as postpone them. Early stage, Alzheimer's, manageable for now, progressive. In the months that followed, Daniel watched his father's world grow smaller in the specific way this disease works, not all at once, but in quiet subtractions, names that came slowly, dates that slipped, the middle of sentences that sometimes lost their endings. But every Father's Day, when Daniel arrived at the door with the sunflower, something different happened. His father's face changed the moment he saw it. Not the slow recognition of a man searching his memory, minus the immediate recognition of something that lived somewhere deeper than memory. His eyes cleared, his shoulders settled. He took the flower the same way he always had, turning it once slowly, in both hands. "My boy," he said, every year the same 2 words. As if no time had passed at all, the doctors had a clinical explanation for it. Daniel didn't need one. Some things, he had come to understand, don't live in the part of the mind that forgets. This Father's Day, Daniel arrived early to help his father's caregiver with the morning routine before bringing the sunflower in the afternoon. He was looking for an extra blanket in the bedroom closet when he saw it, a shoebox on the shelf, worn at the corners, sealed with a single piece of tape that had been applied and reapplied over the years until the lid had taken on the slightly uneven look of something long tended. He almost left it alone. He almost put the blanket back and closed the door and didn't ask. He didn't. Inside the box, arranged with a care that made his throat close, were 20 dried sunflowers. Each one preserved as well as a dried flower can be minus petals, faded from yellow to the color of old paper, stems wrapped carefully in the same thin vendor's paper they'd arrived in. Some had small pieces of tape on the paper, with dates written in his father's handwriting. The earliest ones in pen, the later ones in pencil, when the pen had become harder to manage. 20 sunflowers, 20 years, every single one. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed with the box in his lap. He didn't move for a long time. He was still sitting there when his father appeared in the doorway, moving slowly with his cane, drawn perhaps by the silence, or perhaps by something else, minus the particular radar that parents never entirely lose for their children's distress. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the open box. His face showed no surprise. "I was wondering when you'd find those," he said. His father made his way to the chair by the window, minus the same chair he had always sat in, the one positioned so he could see the door minus, and lowered himself into it with the careful deliberateness of a man who has learned to be patient with his own body. Daniel carried the box to him. His father didn't open it. He just rested one hand on the lid and was quiet for a moment, the way he had always been quiet, before saying something that mattered. "The first one you brought me," he said slowly. "I was having the worst year of my life. You were 7. You didn't know that. You just showed up at the door with a flower you'd walk to get by yourself, and I thought minus." He paused, gathered himself. "I thought he came. He's 7 years old, and everything is hard and complicated, and he came anyway." He looked at Daniel. "I kept it so I'd remember that, and then you came back the next year, and the next, even the year we fought, even the year you drove 6 hours." He touched the box lightly. "There were years I thought, maybe you wouldn't. Maybe things had gotten too busy or too hard or too far. But you always came. Every year you chose to come." He looked up, and his eyes were clear the way. They only were now in certain moments, minus the disease stepping back just far enough to let the man through. "That's what these are," he said quietly. "They're not sunflowers. They're every year you showed up." Daniel could not speak. He reached out and put his hand over his father's on the lid of the box. And they sat like that for a long time, the two of them in the quiet room, while outside the summer light moved slowly across the floor, the way it does on long June afternoons, when there is nowhere else you need to be. If this story reminded you of someone you love, minus someone who has been quietly keeping score of every year you showed up minus, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your dad today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what is the smallest thing you do for someone you love that you hope means more than you know? Tell us. Let this be the place where the quiet things finally get said out loud. Because somewhere, right now, a father is sitting in a chair by a window, and on the table beside him, in a thin paper wrapper, is a sunflower that arrived this morning. He already knows exactly who brought it. Even when he forgets everything else, minus he always knows that.